guys. Cheer up.
Things will get worse.
We ain't got no water anywhere. Food's bad. So's the air. Got no resources. In a great big stupor. All because of the evil King Koopa.
You know the law, Toad.
Hey, wait a minute. You can't arrest a guy for just singing a song.
For anti-Koopa songs, we can. Plumbers!
No, he is. I'm just apprenticing.
Get in the car!
But I didn't do
Get in the
nothing.
car!
Are you telling us that you can arrest a guy for being a plumber? Get out of here!
Get in there, plumber! Now!
Hey, what is
All
this?
right. What do we do?
I'm getting arrested for being a plumber.
Write his number down.
You boys ain't from around here, are you? Brooklyn.
What are you doing? Hey!
Hey, get away! Come on! Hey, come on!
Hey, you want to get a phone call?
Name.
Mario.
Last name.
Mario.
Okay, what's your name?
Luigi.
Luigi?
No, Luigi Mario.
Okay, look, how many Marios are there between the two of you?
There's three. There's Mario, and Luigi Mario.
Mike! Up these Marios around the side.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 261, Super Mario Brothers. This is a podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. And a huge hi and welcome to Verbal Diorama, whether you are a brand new listener to this podcast, whether you are a regular returning listener. If you are, welcome back to this podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. Thank you for trusting the fungus. I am so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of Super Mario Brothers. And if you are a regular returning listener, thank you so much for your continued support. It means so much to me as an independent podcast to have that continuous support. And obviously, thank you so much for all of the lovely comments for the most recent episodes, for Star Trek, the motion picture, and Bowfinger, with bizarrely Bowfinger being more popular on its first day of release than Star Trek, which just goes to show that you never know what's going to resonate with listeners. Who could have predicted that? But this is going to be a huge episode, so I am just going to jump straight in to Super Mario Brothers, because this one is a long time coming to this podcast. This movie is exactly why this podcast exists. So let's just jump into the alternate dimension, where this movie was a huge hit, had several sequels, and Dennis Hopper and Bob Hoskins went to their graves immensely proud of it all. That's what I would want, anyway. A long time ago, the Earth was ruled by dinosaurs. They were big, so not a lot of people went around hassling them. Actually, no people went around hassling them because there weren't any people yet. Just the first tiny mammals. Basically, life was good. Then something happened. A giant meteorite struck the Earth. Goodbye, dinosaurs. But what if the dinosaurs weren't all destroyed? What if the impact of that meteor created a parallel dimension where the dinosaurs continue to thrive and evolve into intelligent, vicious, and aggressive beings, just like us? And what if they found a way back? Here's the trailer for Super Mario Brothers.
Miraculous world, another dimension, the universe next door. An alternate world separated by time and space and yet somehow joined and contiguous with our home.
Mario Brothers Plumbing. No leak too small. No. Don't touch it. No, it's not a big problem. Just leave it to the professionals. We'll be right there. Luigi, we got a broken dishwasher at the Riverfront Cafe. You know what that means?
Yeah.
We got Mike. This way.
How do you know?
I've been listening to pipes all my life. Come on.
See that?
Yeah.
Down there. Let's go in! Mario!
Where the hell are we? Who's this Cooper clown? We gotta talk to that goofball now.
That Koopa clown?
One evil, egg-sucking son of a snake.
Your princess is here.
Go ahead and say it. Dinosaur.
You may think of evolution as an upward process. Loyal child of the royal family.
What I care about is the future of our species.
Name? Mario. Last name?
Mario.
Okay, what's your name?
Luigi.
Luigi?
Luigi Mario.
Prepare for the invasion and ready the troops. We're going down.
Mario and Luigi are just two Brooklyn plumbers who happen upon a young woman needing help. They find out her name is Daisy, and the Scapelli company is trying to sabotage her archaeological dig site. The plumbers are a handy help when some Scapelli goons try to flood the tunnels, but in the commotion, Daisy is kidnapped by a pair of different goons, these ones working for President Cooper, who lives in an alternate dimension where dinosaurs evolved into humanoid creatures, and Daisy is actually the long-lost princess of the kingdom, and with the meteorite around her neck, can actually merge the worlds. The Mario brothers go into the dimension to save her, and they end up becoming rather super. Let's run through the cast. We have Bob Hoskins as Mario, John Leguizamo as Luigi Mario, Dennis Hopper as King Koopa, Samantha Mathis as Princess Daisy, Fisher Stevens as Iggy, Richard Edson as Spike, Dana Kaminsky as Daniela, Fiona Shaw as Lena, Mojo Nixon as Toad, and a cameo by Lance Henriksen as the King. Super Mario Bros. Was written by Parker Bennett and Terry Runty and Ed Solomon, directed by Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, and was based on the character of Mario by Nintendo. So, last year, Super Mario Bros. Celebrated its 30th anniversary. It was a fairly muted celebration, but its acknowledgement for the most part came with the release of the new Super Mario Bros. Movie, an Illumination animation starring Chris Pratt, Anya Taylor-Joy and Jack Black, with many sites finally acknowledging the movie that came 30 years before, some praising it retrospectively, others just firmly in the "this movie is still rubbish" camp. So, before we begin, my tuppence on this movie. It's great. It's a bad movie, objectively, but I watched this movie all the time as a kid. I have a huge turn of nostalgia goggles for it, and I'm really glad I do. Because Verbal Diorama is all about showing how miraculous it is that any movie exists, and especially this one, because, hoo boy, this had problems. It is a hot, beautiful, miraculous mess. So let's get into the history and legacy of Super Mario Bros. Before we get de-evolved. But shouldn't that be devolved? Anyway, it's been don't know who the character of Mario is. It's a him, Mario. He started with no name in Shigeru Miyamoto's platform arcade Donkey Kong, and the game was a huge success, with the character referred to as Jumpman. But over time, he was christened Mario, allegedly after namesake Mario Segali, who was renting a warehouse in Tukwila, Washington to Nintendo as their American headquarters in 1981. Apparently, during development of Donkey Kong, Segali visited the offices to demand a late rent payment from Nintendo of America president Minoru Arakawa, and Nintendo unofficially called the character Mario, with the official naming coming the following year, with Mario as the villain in Donkey Kong Jr. Mario gained a brother Luigi in the arcade game Mario Brothers in 1983, a spin-off from Donkey Kong, and the successor Super Mario Brothers came out for the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, in 1985, the popularity of which means that almost 40 years later, Super Mario Brothers from 1985 is 8th in the best-selling video games of all time, with 58 million units sold. Comparably, Pac-Man from 1980 has 42 million units, and Duck Hunt from 1984 has 28.3 million. Its closest competitor within its own franchise is Super Mario Bros. 3 from 1988, with 24.4 million. I had a NES and a SNES. I was part of the generation that played Mario all the time. I still have a NES and a SNES, and my 8-year-old nephew loves to play Super Mario World, because we all know Luigi is a better playable character, right? So, he loves to play Mario, I love to play Luigi. It's a harmonious gaming experience. This movie wasn't the first attempt at a live-action adaptation of Mario. The live-action animated hybrid TV series The Super Mario Bros. Super Show ran from September to December 1989, with Lou Albano as Mario and Danny Wells as Luigi. Andy Hayward, the CEO of DIC Enterprises, had spent about a year trying to persuade Nintendo to license the popular characters, and DIC also planned to release an animated film based on the animated TV section of the show in 1990. That obviously never happened. What did was producer Roland Joffe, known for directing the very serious Academy Award-nominated films The Killing Fields and The Mission, and a partnership between his production company Leitmotiv and Jake Ebert's production company Allied Filmmaker. Joffe had come up with an idea to make a Super Mario Bros. Movie and went to Nintendo of America to meet with President Minoru Arakawa. Nintendo had licensed the property before, but not for a live-action movie. Joffe had an idea for something a bit more adult than the video game. 1 month later, Joffe was having a meeting at Nintendo HQ in Kyoto to meet Hiroshi Yamauchi, president of Nintendo, and Arakawa's father-in-law. Other big studios wanted the use of the characters, so what made Joffe's pitch so special? Quote, "Because you'll get something original out of us," unquote. He left that meeting having impressed Yamauchi and with a $2 million contract and the rights to the characters to make a live-action movie, with Nintendo retaining the merchandising rights, and importantly for this story, Nintendo weren't really bothered about creative control. The first script that was written for this movie is sadly lost to the multiple dimensions of time, and that is Barry Morrow's. He is another Oscar winner. His first and only draft was nicknamed Drain Man, because he wrote Rain Man, of course. The only known details of the plot are that a ring is lost down a pipe, and this means an existential road trip for two brothers. Sound familiar yet? Mario is described as being the brains, while Luigi is apparently a savant. I don't know why this draft is referred to as Drain Man, by the way. Almost the entire draft was finished except for the final scene, which Morrow never did complete, as they hired a new team of writers to make a less serious drama and more of a sibling comedy. That team of new writers was Jim Genowine and Tom S. Parker. Regular listeners of this podcast will recall that they featured quite recently. They were two of the only credited writers for the Flintstones. That is a super fun episode. Check that out if you like the drama. But before they got their hands on the Flintstones, they wrote a subversion of fairy tale cliches, a Wizard of Oz type tale, a comedic fantasy not unlike Shrek, where brothers Mario and Luigi pursue a princess into a hidden world, complete with mushroom people and the evil King Koopa. Mario is the older, wiser brother, with Luigi the young dreamer. This revision, dated July 1991, allegedly cost $10 million to develop, with Greg Beeman attached to direct, before he was dismissed due to the failure of his 1992 film Mum and Dad Save the World. Harold Ramis would be approached to direct, but would decline. The problem with these scripts seemed to be that nothing was sticking. Fantasy movies, which peaked in the mid-80s, weren't really popular anymore, and Roland Joffe wanted something different. That was when the idea of Max Headroom popped into his head. Originally debuted on Channel 4 here in the UK in 1985, it had a TV movie and 3 series to 1987, and was created and directed by husband and wife team Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel. It also had a US version on ABC from 1987 to 1988. It was set in a futuristic dystopia with an oligarchy of TV networks ruling the world. It was comedic and satirical, with roots in cyberpunk, but its humour was dark. And adult Super Mario Bros. Didn't have to be light and fluffy, because we'd get that in 2023. It could be dystopian and dark, and let's be honest, darkness and stories rooted in dark adaptations were a bit of a thing in the late 80s and early 90s. In my episode on Batman, 1989, that's episode 153, I went into how it changed everything about cinema, from aesthetic to superheroes to merchandising. Gritty realism was in, and 1 year later, in 1990, another adaptation of a comic book series would also be rooted in dark, gritty realism, and would become the highest-grossing independent film up to that point. And that was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The similarities between the Turtles and Mario are abundant. That would be an excellent one to do on the podcast one day. But it also was based on something that used to be an animated series. It had complex puppets and animatronics. It was also filmed partly on location in New York and partly in North Carolina, just like this movie. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a huge success, having the second biggest US opening ever up until then after Batman. Both were a phenomenon, so you can totally understand the idea to make Mario darker in tone to emulate that success maybe. Ricky Morton and Annabelle Jankel had made Max Headroom and previously directed a fairly underwhelming Dennis Quaid movie called DOA. They were young, a little naive, but they had big dreams. They were hired to direct, and a meeting between Joffe, Morton and Jankel cemented the idea of a darker, grittier adaptation of the video game source material. Parker Bennett and Terry Runty came on board to write a new draft in October 1991, which stuck with the fantasy realm but added Cooper's plot affecting both the fantasy world and the human world, and the idea of humanoid dinosaurs, an idea taken from the recently released Super Mario World game, where the brothers end up in dinosaur land, and it introduces a character called Yoshi, a friendly dinosaur who uses his tongue to eat enemies. Ghostbusters would be used as inspiration for the characterization of Mario, making him more Peter Venkman-like. But this would change when Bob Hoskins was tipped to play Mario. Weird, dark and funny was the tone that they were aiming for. But now, it was too funny, and Bennett and Runty were dismissed. They'll be back later, don't worry. And in came Dick Clement and Ian LaFrennay, and in March 1992, their draft upped the action and science fiction elements to make it less comedic, but keep the narrative and character of the Bennett and Runty draft. Clement and LaFrennay's second draft had echoes of Mad Max, with a race in the desert that also served as a Mario Kart Easter egg. It gave Daisy and Lena much more to do in the third act, with the two women involved in the interdimensional merge, but the stronger story led to a diversion away from most of the connection to the actual games. This was the scripts, though, that gave us most of the cast. So let's park the various scripts and I'll come back to them, because casting was obviously going to be crucial. Initially, Dustin Hoffman expressed an interest in playing Mario, but in those early stages, Minoru Arakawa had dismissed the idea, believing him to not be right for the part. Tom Hanks was considered to play Luigi, but he allegedly wanted $4 million, and his recent movies hadn't done very well at the box office, so he was dropped. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Michael Keaton were both approached to play Cooper. Both would turn it down. Bob Hoskins was sent the initial script, but he didn't like it, and he didn't want to be typecast as a family film actor. Roland Joffe was pretty set on Hoskins for Mario, though, and despite Hoskins' reluctance, kept sending him script revisions until we got to the Clement and LaFrennay second draft. This was what clinched Hoskins. He was the right actor physically. Directors Morton and Jankel agreed. They had their Mario, the leader of this unconventional family unit, and now they needed a fresh-faced Luigi. John Leguizamo was an up-and-coming actor and stand-up comic from Queens, and Morton and Jankel went to see his stand-up, and he won them over. Leguizamo would comment on Italians playing Latino characters in movies, and now a Latino would be playing an Italian. But, Luigi needs a princess. So then we come to Samantha Mathis, who was kind of everywhere in the 90s, having debuted in Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater, and co-starred with him again in Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. I've also done an episode on that. She was also on the up, and would go on to co-star with River Phoenix and star in Little Women, but a princess is always taken hostage by the bad guy. And because of his parts in the films Apocalypse Now, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and Blue Velvet, directed by David Lynch, Dennis Hopper is regarded as one of the most important actors of the 20th century. He collaborated with some of the greatest directors in cinema history and emerged as a major force in the development of the independent American film in the 1960s. But all actors need to make a paycheck, and Hopper was always very open about the fact that he took Super Mario Bros. Purely for the money. But back to the scripts, because this second Clement and Lafreniere draft was what the actors signed up to. Morton and Jankel loved it, calling it brilliant, fantastic, emotional and beautiful. Producers Roland Joffe and Jake Eberts weren't so keen. The budget was ballooning. They thought it was too effects heavy, and so despite sets already being built based on this version of the script, and actors signing on with this version of the script, and principal photography right around the corner, Joffe and Eberts went behind everyone's backs with the backing of Nintendo and removed Clement and Lafreniere from the project, and without anyone's knowledge, hired Ed Solomon and Ryan Rowe. Now, there was a good reason for this underhanded move. They desperately needed more money thanks to the ballooning budget. It was an independent production at the time financed by a French bank, so they needed to raise the money to finish it. Joffe and Eberts would strike a new distribution deal with Disney's Hollywood Pictures label. Disney wanted something a bit more family-friendly, a bit less dark adult. Solomon and Rowe's script, dubbed the Disney Princess script, was dated the 17th of April 1992. Existing characters were consolidated, Toad's role shifted to Iggy and Spike, the desert race was removed for cost, as was a climactic showdown between Mario and Koopa on the Brooklyn Bridge. The ending became a double wedding, with Mario marrying Daniela and Luigi marrying Daisy. But all of this was done behind the directors' backs. They had zero say in the changes, and they were furious with the change, and they considered quitting. But they'd put too much of their time into the movie, and so they decided to see it through and reclaim their original vision. It's important to know, though, that Disney would not have bankrolled the production without this rewrite. The actors were similarly furious that the script had deviated so much from what they'd signed up for. Rocky Morton, who'd already storyboarded the entire film based on the previous script, 8 feet high and 20 feet long worth of storyboards, set fire to them in anger. The producers forbade Morton and Jankel to speak to Solomon, but they needed to know what was going on and tried to get certain key things included into a new script. Morton would say that when Joffe and Eberts found out they'd spoken to Solomon, they went ballistic at him. The next version of the script, dated the 28th of April to the 17th of June 1992, was nicknamed Rainbow and solely written by Ed Solomon. This was the first revision of the shooting script, which had been torn to shreds, taped back together again, and was named Rainbow for its many coloured revision pages. This restored the climactic Brooklyn Bridge face-off between Mario and Koopa, among other things. But basically, what I'm saying is that this production was a poop show, except it was the other word for poop. The producers didn't want to work with the directors. The directors were getting the blame for everything, and they continued to get the blame. Rocky Morton started to have beef with Ed Solomon, who was being told one thing by producers and another by the directors. No one was talking to each other. Threats were being thrown around, the set was chaos, no one knew what was going on, no one knew what they were going to be filming. Do they design it this way or that way? Is that in the script? Nope, that was taken out 3 revisions ago. This was creative differences at its most vicious, But everyone was too far gone. They'd started production, started casting, started building huge sets, all the prosthetics and animatronic creatures, and they were hemorrhaging money. And I'm coming to all of this, but I'm not even done with the scripts. So bear in mind that filming started on the 6th of May 1992 and wrapped on the 27th of July. The first Rainbow script was being constantly rewritten between the 28th of April and the 17th of June. And then Solomon departed the production. His work, making the script as cohesive as possible, was done. The original screenwriting team, Parker Bennett and Terry Runty, visited the set by chance. It's them, Parker and Terry. I told you they'd be back. And then they were rehired to handle a final rewrite between the 3rd and the 14th of July. They would redefine Luigi and Daisy's relationship, change their meeting, would write in Lance Henriksen's cameo as the king. Bennett and Runty stayed into post-production, contributed to ADR, added the expository dinosaur prologue, and the Goomba subtitles, which ultimately would never have been used. And as we know from the Flintstones, arbitration can be a B word when you have multiple teams of writers involved in a movie. Bennett and Runty not only successfully arbitrated for their own credit, they also arbitrated for Ed Solomon to also receive credit for this movie. And just like the Flintstones, the production design here is gorgeous. An entire city was built inside the Roanoke cement factory in Castle Hayne, North Carolina, which was also used for the filming of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as well as The Crow. I've also done an episode on that. It was a steel concrete framework, meaning they could build scaffolding and hang sets on it. Too many people look at the negatives of this film being a bit of a mess, but this was all incredibly ambitious. And this building was huge, with multiple floors, 6 to 7 stories high. They built Cooper's offices on the top floor so you can look through his windows onto the minions below. It was roasting hot, well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 37.7 degrees Celsius. It was huge and claustrophobic, sexy and dirty, with ripped latex hanging off walls as the fungus. The production designer David Snyder was also art director on Blade Runner, for which he received an Academy Award nomination. He was also production designer for Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. As this was a directorial team, one director could be doing casting in LA, and the other could be managing the set design in North Carolina. Throughout the movie, there are nods to the games, Bullet Bills, Thwomp Stompers, Bob-Ombs, and of course, Mario and Luigi's coloured overalls. As the script changed, sets were rebuilt, so filming could only take place from certain angles because the rest of the set wasn't finished yet. It's an accident that Dino Hatton looks the way that it does. It's the result of a frenetic, chaotic, stressful shoot where literally everyone behind the scenes worked their butts off. And at the time, North Carolina was a right-to-work state, which meant there were no union workers. It saved money, but after just a week of filming, they were already 1 week behind. In an oral history with Inverse, Roland Joffe described the situation as, quote, "This is a story of a hothouse of creativity, emotion, danger, imagination, all at white-hot heat, and it would be odd to expect that to not have its own extraordinary set of tensions. It was like going to war," unquote. Instead of firing the directors, the original director of photography, Peter Levy, was fired and replaced with Dean Semler, who had just won an Academy Award for Dances with Wolves. But while the producers, directors, and stars were at metaphorical war, literally everyone else was stepping up and going above and beyond on this movie, despite all of its problems. And one of those people was Patrick Tatopoulos. Regular listeners will remember his name from Godzilla 1998 and the incredible work he did to make Godzilla come to life. We're also going to be coming back to Patrick Tatopoulos and actually a couple of other people who worked on this movie next episode. Also working on this movie was MEL, Makeup and Effects Laboratory, who were primarily responsible for the Goombas and Allosaurus rats in the movie, led by Alan Napone and Paul Elliott. They were recommended to the production by Patrick Tatopoulos to do the Goombas. They'd never created dinosaur creatures before, but relished the challenge. Despite this, the producers and directors passed due to their lack of experience. So they went back to their shop and sculpted a quick lizard head, dressed it in military clothing, and sent a photo to the producers and directors, who confirmed it was exactly what they were looking for, and then they were hired. Tatopoulos would design the Goombas, who were originally just going to be background characters, but they made the heads so detailed with animatronics and ended up making a better Goomba than the production expected. When the script was rewritten to make Hark, just a normal Goomba, become the devolved Toad, they made the animatronic model bigger and also made his look softer and more friendly. There also wasn't just one model Goomba, they were all distinct heads based around 3 types, the ape head, lizard head and snake head, and they collaborated with costume designer Joseph Porro to make sure that the costume ideas worked around the internal structure of both the actor and the animatronics, and everything that goes into one full, complete 7.5-foot tall Goomba. Additional plans to have lizard tongues, hands and tails were cut, the latter 2 for budgetary reasons and the tongues because the directors didn't like them. But there are a couple of scenes where you can see the Goomba lizard hands that were made as prototypes. The rest of the time, the Goombas just wear black gloves. Yoshi was one of the standout creations and wholly eclipsed by everything going on in Jurassic Park. Just like for the Goombas, Dave Nelson was recommended by Patrick Tatopoulos to work on Yoshi's mechanics. He had just come off building full mechanical puppets for Child's Play and a gnome named Norm. Also up for the job were Jim Henson's Creature Shop. They obviously didn't get it. Patrick Tatopoulos knew about Jurassic Park, and I guess who didn't in the industry at that time, and specifically designed Yoshi to be cuter and more baby-like, with large eyes, with a large tongue that came through the head via a hole that passed through the centre of the neck mechanism. And that neck had to balance an incredibly complex and heavy 9-pound head. Yoshi's skin was also foam latex, and at this stage, Yoshi was one of the most cutting-edge full cable puppets ever made. 9 people were needed to operate him. Dave Nelson on the head and neck, Mark Mater, who also worked on the 3D sculpture for Yoshi, Stacey Mater and Rob Capwell on the facial movements, Brock Winkless on the body, Tim Ralston on the arms, Charles Lutkis on the hands, Mekhi Houston on the legs, Mike Elizalde on the tail and Chris Hunt on the dolly. Yoshi was so impressive that after producers and directors saw him, they added more scenes for him. So impressive was Yoshi that the producers of Jurassic Park came by the shop to look at the puppet during development, and at one point they were considering splitting the build of a Jurassic Park into different shops, and they wanted to bring the Yoshi engineering team in to work on the smaller dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. That didn't end up happening, but when the producers of Jurassic Park are so impressed by your puppet, you know you've done a good job. Jurassic Park's cutting-edge CG dinosaurs would sound the death knell for cable puppets though, meaning that Yoshi was the last of the cable puppets before CG took the industry by storm, and the Yoshi puppet is still owned by Dave Nelson. The original finale, which was unfortunately cut for budget reasons, was a showdown on the Brooklyn Bridge, but this was changed to Cooper's Devolvement, of which there are 4 stages. Stage 1 is a large lizard-like smile prosthetic on Dennis Hopper. Stage 2 is a prosthetic overhead with a plastic mouth insert and radio-controlled lip pulls put on a different performer that was more of the right body shape for Cooper. Stage 3 is a dinosaur-like radio-controlled puppet with an additional operator underneath for the larger head movements. And Stage 4, a larger radio-controlled puppet head looking more T-Rex-like. After that, it was all CG animation. There are 13 weeks of work on that CG animation for 13 seconds of screen time. But the animatronics aren't the end of the story. This movie might have been overshadowed by the work in Jurassic Park, but it also pioneered in digital visual effects too. It was the first film that went through the Kodak Cineon film scanner, a film recorder just for visual effects, and the first to use Gary Trigaskis' Flame compositing software before it became a Discrete Logic, now Autodesk product. Visual effects designer and supervisor Chris Woods spent 2 years working on Super Mario Bros., surviving through the various script edits, with various crew joining, then leaving, plus witnessing all the issues on set. Woods saw everything. Despite the, at the time, healthy budget of $28 million, visual effects, as we know from Jurassic Park, aren't cheap. This was an independent production with huge dreams. Woods came on board to help with the challenge of keeping the costs low but the effects quality high. He made a deal with Gary Trigaskis, with the Flame product still in alpha with lots of bugs, and not at all production ready, that he would be hands-on to deal with bugs. Flame would be the product used for image displacement, like the part where Mario and Luigi jump through the stone portal, that was done with Flame. You would take a 2D image and displace it using another image displacement tool, and then you could light it. Woods would put together a team of 30 digital artists and traditional rotoscope artists to share knowledge on both techniques. Kevin Bjork was brought on board as a software developer and animator to teach people how computer graphics worked. He taught for 14 months. Very few of them had ever done a large-scale production on this level before. It was Bjork who put together the particle animations using a piece of software called Blizzard. No one was doing that in 1992 with particle systems. It was really incredibly groundbreaking. He would pass the particle images to digital animator and compositor Sheena Dougal, and she would incorporate that into her composited image. Everything on this movie was experimental. They had 20 SGI VGX graphics systems in this tiny office that was constantly hot, with staff working around the clock to do things that we think of as rudimentary now, like developing ripples as displacement elements for portals. Only large companies like ILM did stuff like this. This was a small team of indie designers, developers, testers, and animators. Bjork also worked on a 60-second long wide shot where the camera pans over Dino Hatton to Daisy in Cooper's Tower, with Samantha Mathis as a live-action shot, and everything else is 3D CGI. Much of this software Bjork wrote himself, a virtual multiplane system where he could design each layer and create the illusion of perspective. He regrets not patenting that product, apparently. The filming of the visual effects shots were done last due to the previously blown budget, and Chris Woods worked as a second unit director to shoot all of the visual effects plates for the movie over the next 6 weeks to return to the digital studio and compile it all. He directed Dennis Hopper during the King Cooper transformation, calling him great, and Bob Hoskins, who he thought was fabulous. Hoskins was jumping through a portal with a cast on his hand after famously breaking a few fingers during a scene in the van with John Leguizamo. They both drank on the job to get through it, and I think everyone knows this by now. But even with a cast on his hand, Hoskins was game to jump through a portal into another dimension with gusto. Outside of ILM, who had their own film scanner, and maybe a handful of other people at the time, film wasn't scanned for digital effects. It was much too expensive in those days to put a whole film through there. The film was all shot in 35mm, so the visual effects plates were all scanned, and it was the first feature film through the Kodak Cineon scanners at Cinesite. Kodak had wanted to do more testing, but Woods was insistent the system was ready. Basically, what I'm saying is this movie is not the massive bomb you've been led to believe it is. This movie is groundbreaking and revolutionary. And I do want to keep this episode as positive as possible because this movie deserves it. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Dennis Hopper hated the production with a vitriolic passion. As I've said, Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel were the directors. They were ultimately responsible for everything that went on set, but they were also scapegoated, and Hopper laid into them for the script rewrites, refusing to say the lines, screaming a tirade of abuse for 3 hours before then doing the scene as it had been rewritten. Fisher Stevens and Richard Edson, playing Iggy and Spike, ended up just making up their lines as they went along. Bob Hoskins didn't see the point of learning too many lines because the script would change. According to David Snyder, the cast was so unhappy with the turn of the film that every Sunday they would go to Wrightsville Beach and do Shakespeare. A cleansing ritual, shall we say. Hoskins was Macbeth and Fiona Shaw was Lady Macbeth. Hopper and Hoskins would pass away in 2010 and 2014 respectively, and both are incredibly well-respected actors, and both would unfortunately regret their association with this movie up until they passed, which is such a terrible shame when you realise the incredible work that actually went in to making this movie. Toward the end of the allotted 10-week shoot, it was clear there was still a lot more work required, but money was running out. The producers determined that they still had 2.5 to 3 weeks of shooting to do, so Morton and Jankel were thanked and basically fired from the production. If it wasn't already apparent by now, things had gotten way out of control. Morton was also locked out of the editing room and had to get the Directors Guild of America union to intervene. He tried to get the editor to cut it digitally, but they refused because they wanted to edit on Moviola and Steenbeck machines, so the process was laboriously slow, which meant delays to get the special effect cut in on time. It would lead to Morton and Jankel being dropped by their agents and spending the next 30 years trying to clear their names. And while it would take 30 years for that to happen, In the background, a passionate cult following was growing in number. While the critics were scathing and the box office faltered, Super Mario Bros. Became a cult favourite for many, including some famous names, one of which was Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino held a midnight showing of Super Mario Bros. On the 11th of March 2023, a sold-out show with people queuing around the block for tickets. The audience who managed to get inside loved it, and also in attendance were Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, 30 years after directing it and not seeing it since. Tarantino had shouted them out on his podcast, and they were amazed by the reaction, even ending up signing autographs. Speaking of passionate fans, Super Mario Bros. The Movie Archive was launched by Ryan Hoss in 2007. Hoss was a longtime fan of the movie and wanted to celebrate it. It is an incredible collection of material, including production materials, interviews, photos. It is one of the most in-depth fan sites I think I've ever seen. In 2010, Stephen Applebaum joined the site to help with the overall running, which included organising interviews with the cast and crew, many of whom, Dennis Hopper and Bob Hoskins notwithstanding, really loved what they'd done, and the contribution Super Mario Bros. Made to the industry writ large. Which brings me to the Morton Jankel Cut, an extended VHS that was found by the Super Mario Bros. Movie Archive team, previously belonging to producer Roland Joffe, which contained 20 minutes of previously unseen material and extended scenes. Unfortunately, the image quality of the VHS was very poor and required heavy restoration. Enter director, editor and artist Garrett Gilchrist. Garrett Gilchrist is a renowned restorer of unfinished and unreleased material, having spent many years working on Richard Williams' unreleased animated film The Thief and the Cobbler. The recobbled cut is available on YouTube and is a must-watch. Thanks to Skip Eisheimer of AV Geeks, Gilchrist was able to obtain digital copies for both the original VHS and the mass-market VHS of the movie that was released in the 1990s. He also examined content from trailers and other uncommon VHS tapes, as well as the Blu-ray release. Gilchrist claims that the film was released in an open matte 4:3 aspect ratio on VHS. In comparison to the VHS, the later DVD and Blu-ray editions are in widescreen and lose some of the picture. Gilchrist maintained the 4:3 aspect ratio for this extended cut. He painstakingly painted out dirt, splices, ghosting and damage frame by frame in many scenes using Photoshop. Previously unseen deleted scenes include more of the Mario Brothers dealings with the Scapelli Plumbing Company, Cooper murdering a technician by de-evolving him into slime, and Iggy and Spike rapping about the overthrow of King Cooper at the Boom Boom Bar. There's more of Lena, Daniela and the Brooklyn Girls. Most scenes are extended in this version with a lot more of the cast, including Dennis Hopper as Cooper. There's also a detailed restoration commentary video. A 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, the Trust the Fungus Super Mario Bros. 30th Anniversary Collector's Edition, has since been released, nicknamed the Lasagna Cut, due to the 5 transfers or layers that were combined from the same VHS source for the Morton Jankel Cut, but restored differently, including all the deleted scenes and additional material upscaled to 4K. But that doesn't take anything away from Gilchrist and his amazing work. Now, there's so much incredible stuff on that fan site. It's at smbmovie.com. I will put a link in the show notes. The positive power of fandom continues to shine. There was a scene in the script where they needed a last name for the characters. Somebody suggested that because they were the Mario brothers, that their last name should be Mario. So they made Mario, and his brother, Luigi Mario. During Japan's 30th anniversary Super Mario Bros. Event in 2015, Shigeru Miyamoto apparently stated that Mario's full name is Mario and Luigi is Luigi Mario. So technically Mario is now canon. A pivotal scene at the end of the movie ended up being cut by producers though, and it's one that could have dispelled a lot of the criticism surrounding the movie's very loose adaptation of the game. And that is that after Mario and Luigi complete their crazy adventure in Dino Hatton, 2 executives from Nintendo turn up at their apartment in Brooklyn. And they want to hear the story because it's on the news and they happen to be making a video game at the time. The Mario brothers tell the Nintendo executives the story, and it's misinterpreted and made into a completely different thing in a video game. The film is meant to represent the actual story, but it gets lost in translation. And that's why the film doesn't literally follow the story in the game. We do get a little post-credits scene similar to that with Iggy and Spike, but having the original ending would have definitely helped people understand why the two were so different. The final addition made to the film during post-production was the animated dinosaur prologue. The film's screenings, which were organised by the producers, left viewers bemused as to what was actually going on, so they decided to include a prologue at the start of the movie to explain the origins of the parallel dimension and the fact that the dinosaurs evolved to human-like beings in order to prevent the audience from being too confused. There was never a prologue in any of the original scripts. Instead, the movie was supposed to begin in the prehistoric world with realistic dinosaurs before the land was completely destroyed by a meteorite, and at the end of the animated sequence, a small clip from the original opening is shown. I'm going to leave the final word on the production to the always wonderful Fiona Shaw, who played Lena, who said, quote, "Maybe the sorrow of this film, if there is a sorrow, is that the potential of it was huge," unquote. It truly was, Fiona. Speaking of huge potential, let's segue into the obligatory Keanu reference of this episode. And basically what that is this is a part of the podcast where I try to link the movie I'm featuring with Keanu Reeves because he is the best of men. And it's a really easy one because Ed Solomon, the writer of Bill and Ted, co-wrote this movie. Ed Solomon has written every single Bill and Ted movie, and that is the easiest way to link this movie to Keanu Reeves. Although I could have also linked it with David Snyder, the production designer, I chose to do Ed Solomon because that is the most obvious. The soundtrack for this movie features 2 songs from Roxette, Almost Unreal, which was released as a single, and To Cinnamon Street. The music video for Almost Unreal features scenes from the film, and it was originally written for the film Hocus Pocus, but Hocus Pocus was given an En Vogue song instead. Roxette then subsequently gave the song to Super Mario Bros. Hence, I love when you do that Hocus Pocus to me. The soundtrack also includes a rendition of Walk the Dinosaur by George Clinton and the Goombas, and Love is the Drug by Divinyls. And as wonderful and upbeat as Alan Silvestri's score is on this movie, it would have been so lovely to hear some actual game music in the movie, rather than just on the beginning credits. Super Mario Bros. Was released on the 28th of May 1993, the same week as Cliffhanger and Made in America. It would open 4th at the box office behind both of those, with Dave at 3rd. On its $48 million budget, it opened with $8.5 million during its opening weekend and ended up grossing $20.9 million domestically and $17.9 million internationally, for a total worldwide gross of $38.8 million. It has a 29% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the site's consensus reading, "Despite flashy sets and special effects, Super Mario Bros. Is too light on story and substance to be anything more than a novelty." Retrospectively, its ambition is mostly seen as positive, and its artistic license on the characters is unlike any other video game adaptation. But no one was as critical on this movie as Nintendo were. They wouldn't license any of their characters again for a feature film until 2016, when they did for Detective Pikachu, which came out in 2019. That movie proved to be a huge financial success and one of the best video game movies ever made to that point. Although you guys know I have a lot of love for Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter and Tomb Raider. They are all previous episodes of this podcast. Super Mario Bros. Was in the list of films under consideration for visual effects for the 66th Academy Awards, up against Cliffhanger, Addams Family Values, Jurassic Park, Alive, The Nightmare Before Christmas and Hocus Pocus. But that long list eventually devolves into a short list, and the final nominees were Jurassic Park, Cliffhanger and The Nightmare Before Christmas, with Super Mario Bros. Unfortunately not even getting nominated. There obviously was no sequel to this movie in film form. However, in 2013, Super Mario Bros. Movie Archive fan site editors Stephen Applebaum and Ryan Hoss teamed with one of the film's original screenwriters, Parker Bennett, for a fan fiction webcomic sequel. In an interview, Applebaum and Hoss had asked Bennett what he would have done if given the opportunity to make a sequel, and Bennett gave broad points about the consequences of the first film and the themes that they would have explored in a sequel. The fanfiction webcomic picks up with Mario and Luigi returning to Dino Hatton to aid Daisy in defeating mad scientist Wart, the final boss from Super Mario Bros. 2. And Nintendo, who had very little involvement in the 1993 film, was fully involved in the 2023 animated movie, a far cry from this one in pretty much every respect. Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Super Mario Bros., co-produced the film with Chris Meledandri and was involved in every step, from casting to animation to developing the story. Nintendo's distance from the original film is something that, in hindsight, Morton regrets, but apparently Miyamoto enjoyed the 1993 movie for what it was at the time. The Super Mario Bros. Movie was released in April 2023, almost 30 years to the day of Super Mario Bros. It received mixed reviews from critics but was a huge box office success, grossing $1.3 billion worldwide and setting multiple box office records, including the biggest worldwide opening weekend for an animated film and the highest grossing film based on a video game. It became the second highest grossing film of 2023, the third highest grossing animated film of all time, and the highest grossing film produced by Illumination. It doesn't have Bob Hoskins as Mario though, and for that, it is inferior. I never saw this movie as the disaster so many others did. It may have been the greatest regret of Bob Hoskins' career, but to me, it just cemented him as this lovable comedic actor. He was Eddie Valiant, he was Smee, and he was Mario. And to this day, I just adore those movies because that was my childhood. Hoskins as Mario might have also been my mother, my father, my brother, my uncle. And in contrast, John Leguizamo as Luigi, I had a huge crush on him. Maybe one of my first crushes. I just thought Luigi was so cool. He was the cool kid in the backwards baseball cap. He was sweet and optimistic, a total goofball. And the brotherly chemistry between Leguizamo and Hoskins just worked. So what if they were hammered throughout filming and they both claimed to hate it? They just clearly got on and found a connection they built into these brothers, despite the age difference. Hoskins was 18 years Leguizamo's senior, but they could have still been brothers with that age gap. And it does lend credence to the fact that Luigi was raised by Mario. Before this, a big-budget video game movie had never been attempted before. This was the first. Video game companies didn't know how much creative control to give producers and directors because this was the first. The ability to depict some of the more fantastical elements frequently found in video games was limited by the special effects technology of the 90s. It's not limited nowadays. Super Mario Bros. Is not an unwatchable movie. It's imminently watchable and enjoyable. The flaws are visible, but ignorable as far as I'm concerned, because there is a lot to love here. But it is the result of 100 poor decisions, lack of communication, and the worst case of creative differences ever before seen in the making of a movie. But it was also an innovative endeavour. The film's visual effects may seem poor by today's standards, but it pioneered the software that would go on to be routinely used in the industry. With its Blade Runner evoking practical sets, makeup, costumes, pyrotechnics, prosthetics, animatronics and puppets, this movie is in its own way a visual masterpiece. It has tone issues and too many cooks spoiling the broth for sure, but it's a fascinating example of not only what Hollywood can do well, but also that the making of any movie relies on people communicating with each other, compromising, and all having the same goals. There are plenty of movies with passionate fan bases, but the Super Mario Bros. Community are ardent, enthusiastic, knowledgeable, and their site is phenomenal. There's so much additional information on there that simply won't fit into this episode. There's some incredible interviews and set photos. It's in the show notes. Please visit it. They are amazing. I like the animated movie. I found it very cute and fun, and my nephew adored it, but it's sanitized and it's safe. This movie took big swings and big risks, and I'm so happy it did. I cannot wait to show my nephew this movie. 31 years later, it brings me so much joy that this movie is finding its renaissance, finding its fan base, and that people are finally trusting the fungus. Because these are the movies we need to be talking about on podcasts. The movies that had the will, but not quite the way. The pioneers that no one really sees because they were overshadowed. No one in Hollywood will ever make a movie quite like this ever again, which makes it even more unique and fascinating. And maybe those Mario brothers really were super after all. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on Super Mario Brothers. And as always, thank you for your continued support of this podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please take a moment and leave a rating or review wherever you found this episode. You can also help spread the word by telling your friends and family about this podcast and about this episode, especially if they're a fan of Super Mario Brothers. And if you want to talk to me about Super Mario Brothers or any episode of this podcast, really, you can find me on social media. I am at Verbal Diorama on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And if you like this episode on Super Mario Brothers, you might also like previous episodes that I've done on video game adaptations. So, strap yourself in and get your trigger finger ready, because there are episodes on this podcast on Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat Annihilation. That is episode 159. There's also episode 233 on Street Fighter 1994. I love Street Fighter. I love Mortal Kombat, but I love Street Fighter just that little bit more. And that is also a hellscape of a movie production. And episode 249, Lara Croft Tomb Raider and Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life. That is another double episode. And that is another huge episode going into the history of the character of Lara Croft as well. As I said, I was a huge gamer when I was a kid, so I have huge nostalgia for all of these games and all of these movies, and I like to think they're really good episodes, actually. So if you have enjoyed this episode, going into that incredibly rich and varied and interesting history of how they made Super Mario Brothers, I do exactly the same for Mortal Kombat, for Mortal Kombat Annihilation, for Street Fighter, for Lara Croft Tomb Raider, and Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life. So if you're interested in those games and those movies, please check out those episodes. So the next episode, I'm just going to leave it to the President of the United States to explain.
In less than an hour, aircraft from here will join others from around the world. And you will be launching the largest aerial battle in the history of mankind. Mankind, that word should have new meaning for all of us today. We can't be consumed by our petty differences anymore. We will be united in our common interest. Perhaps it's fate that today is the 4th of July, and you will once again be fighting for our freedom. Not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from annihilation. We're fighting for our right to live, to exist. And should we win the day, the 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
Thank you, Mr. President. And yes, the next episode is going to be on the history and legacy of Independence Day, and it's going to be coming out on Independence Day. So please join me on Independence Day for the history and legacy of Independence Day. This podcast is free and it always will be free. However, if you have enjoyed listening to this episode and you do have some spare change that you would like to give to help the running of this podcast, then you can, and you can do that one of two ways. You could go to verbaldiorama.com/tips and give a one-off tip, or you can go to verbaldiorama.com/Patreon and you can join the amazing patrons of this podcast. They are Simon E, Sade, Claudia, Simon B, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, Zoe, Kev, Pete, Heather, Danny, Ali, Stu, Brett, Philip, Michelle, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, and Russell. Weirdly, their surnames are all Mario, and I don't know why that is. If you want to get in touch, then you can. You can email me at verbaldiorama@gmail.com. You can say hi, you can give me feedback or suggestions, or you can go to my website, verbaldiorama.com, and you can fill out the contact form. You can find all episodes on the website and also a little bit about me if you're interested. And you can also find stuff that I do at filmstories.co.uk too. And finally,
how can they let us suffer like this? What are they, completely cold-blooded? Yes, moron. They're reptiles. Well, just because they're reptiles doesn't mean they can't show us what basic human decency. Okay. Oh, breathe on my hands. What? Don't say anything. What? Hi, Mario! Get out of here! Oh, Mario, I knew you'd come for me. Yes, you did it.
Honey, listen. Get that mattress, the Goomba mattress. Take it over there.
Get the Goomba mattress. Come on, pick it up. Get that fast. Move it. Hey, move it.
Come on, bring it over here.
Very good. Hey, you're right.
You must be the girls, the missing girls from Brooklyn.
Yeah, except for Angelica. She's from Queens. She's all right. Hey, I'm freezing my butt off here. There's cold air coming from that air vent.
Yeah, we froze the pipes. We're going for a little ride.
bye.
Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes.